We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and years ago, perusing the internet, we came across a particular man in a documentary. You couldn't remember his name because it was years ago, but remember that he said that he went into a Jewish library and he looked at the Babylonian Talmud, the Jewish encyclopedias, etc. And then he started to relay what was contained within them, which sounded very gross and sick. We couldn't remember his name because it was years ago, but we recently came across it, and this man is Ted Pike. And we found this documentary on what he had to say. The first part of it is normal conversation, but later on it may get to a point where it's deemed, especially by the Jews, anti-Semitic. So we'll have a little listen, and then we'll continue from there.
Ted Pike. Every year, thousands of pilgrims come to this place, Palestine, to discover their spiritual roots. Yet today, it is not just the religious. Mankind in general is turning its attention toward this land. Most of us realize that if World War III erupts, it could begin right here in a collision between Arab and Jew. What are the causes of this conflict between Arab and Jew? A conflict which never seems to go away. Before Zionist settlers came here around the turn of the century, this region was not particularly known for strife. Yet since then, it has known little but strife. Is there something within Judaism itself which acts as an abrasive on this land? To answer that question, we don't need to make another pilgrimage to Palestine. We don't need to visit historic sites or Jewish shrines. Instead, since Judaism is very much a religion of its literature, we need to go where its most sacred teachings are preserved. We need to go to a synagogue, in particular, the library of a synagogue. In every synagogue library, we find hundreds of books, but there are a few which tower above the rest in authority. These include the Encyclopedia Judaica, the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, the Jewish Encyclopedia. In the oldest of these, the Jewish Encyclopedia, we encounter fascinating new perspectives on the inner teachings of Judaism, perspectives which are well known to most religious Jews, but unknown to Christians.
Most Christians believe that the Judaism of the Old Testament is very similar to Judaism today. Yet the Jewish Encyclopedia, in its article on Judaism, says modern Judaism and the Judaism of the Old Testament are very different. It says that after Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah in the 6th century BC and led the Jews to distant Babylon, the Jews were faced with challenges to their faith they had never before experienced. Ever since the time of Solomon, the religion of Israel had centered around the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, with its sacrifices and ritual. The question now became, how could one be a true Jew in a very foreign, even hostile environment? The need arose for a certain class of lay priests, called scribes or sopherim, to interpret the law in this new setting and make it workable. In time, these scribes became what the New Testament calls the scribes and Pharisees, the greatest legal authorities of Israel for all ages. The Pharisees said there were really two inspired revelations to the Jews. There was the written law of Moses received atop Sinai, but there was also the oral tradition acquired by 70 elders who came to the base of the mountain but were forbidden to proceed farther. The Pharisees said that these 70 elders, or Sanhedrin, received a much more extensive and profound revelation than Moses, a revelation which was never written down, yet took precedent over the written law. When Jesus came on the scene, his reaction was to bitterly denounce this counterfeit tradition. Christ said the Pharisees, by their tradition, had made the law of God of none effect. He considered the Pharisees the most dangerous leadership Israel ever had. In 70 A.D., Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. Although Jewish sects such as the Sadducees now disappeared, the Pharisees emerged with even greater power over the Jewish people. The Jewish Encyclopedia describes the new role of the Pharisees. With the destruction of the temple, the Sadducees disappeared altogether, leaving the regulation of all Jewish affairs in the hands of the Pharisees. Henceforth, Jewish life was regulated by the Pharisees. The whole history of Judaism was reconstructed from the Pharisaic point of view. Pharisaism shaped the character of Judaism and the life and thought of the Jew for all of the future. In 135 AD, all Jews were expelled from Palestine. The Pharisees led most Palestinian Jews in a mass migration back to Babylon. The majority of Jews were already in Babylon and had been since the time of Nebuchadnezzar 600 years earlier. Yet around 140 AD, Babylon became the acknowledged land of refuge for world Jewry. For another 1,000 years, Judaism flourished in Babylon under the leadership of the Pharisees. Great academies of the rabbis were established and thousands of new laws formulated. There, those same Pharisees who killed Jesus Christ remained the undisputed rulers of Judaism.
In Babylon, the Pharisees codified their oral traditions into the Babylonian Talmud, the written form of that oral tradition which Jesus so bitterly rebuked. The Talmud reveals how deep was Israel's apostasy. In her beginning, God gave the Hebrews the loftiest, the most upright literature and ethics the world has ever known. Yet when they turned their backs on him, they produced the Talmud, a work which has aptly been called a monument to human folly. The Talmud also helps us understand the basis for Christ's unflattering descriptions of the Pharisees.
Jesus described the Pharisees as hypocrites, children of hell, blind guides, whited sepulchres, full of dead men's bones. He even described the Pharisees as children of their father the devil, a murderer from the beginning. The Talmud confirms Christ's words. In the Talmud, in Treatise Sanhedrin, an extensive passage describes the right of the Pharisee to kill anyone, just as...
And it goes on from there, and it gets very deep, and even deeper, and many practicing Jews, etc., would say, oh, that's anti-Semitic. And we'd probably get a copy strike or something like that. So we're leaving you to go to watch this documentary yourself. We can see it on YouTube if it's up there, if it's available, called The Other Israel by Ted Pike. Okay, we're not afraid or anything like that, it's just out of respect of a people's, right? Okay, until we can find that what's being said is not anti-Semitic, it's not a lot of rubbish, it's actually established fact, the evidence proves itself evident, and so forth. But we have taken the liberty to look at different books, because you see both sides of the coin, look at both sides of the coin, the pros and the cons, and we came across this, the Talmud and Anti-Semitic Polemics by Anti Defamation League. That's those who deem what's anti-Semitic, or define what being anti-Semitic is, according to them. Okay, so this is the Talmud and Anti-Semitic Polemics, February 2003, and it states here, the Talmud and Anti-Semitic Polemics, preface, recently there has been a renewal, at a certain time there was a renewal of attacks on Judaism and Jews through recycling of old accusations and distortions about the Talmud. Anti-Talmud tracts were originally developed in the Middle Ages. Okay, we'll read that again because it's quite hard to see and read. Recently there has been a renewal of attacks on Judaism and Jews through recycling of old accusations and distortions about the Talmud. Anti-Talmud tracts were originally developed in the Middle Ages as Christian polemics against Judaism, but today they emanate from a variety of Christian, Muslim and secular sources. Sometimes such studies have blatantly anti-Semitic tones, sometimes they are more subtle, yet all of them remain as false and pernicious today as they did in the Middle Ages. Because of their unfortunate frequent reappearance, there is a need to formally rebut these accusations and canons. The Anti Defamation League developed the following essay that explains in an honest and scholarly way the Talmudic teachings as understood by jurists religious authorities. DC Talmud in Anti-Semitic Polemics contents. Introduction. Attempts to denigrate Judaism by quoting from classical rabbinic works are on record from as early as the 12th century. By selectively citing various passages from the Talmud and Midrash, polemicists have sought to demonstrate that Judaism espouses hatred for non-Jews, or Gentiles, or the Goyim, and specifically for Christians, and promotes obscenity, sexual perversion, and other immoral behaviour. To make these passages serve their purposes, these polemicists frequently mistranslate them or cite them out of context. Wholesale fabrication of passages is not unknown. They usually dismiss attempts to correct their misreadings as hair-splitting or dishonest attempts to portray Judaism in a favourable light. In distorting the normative meanings of rabbinic texts, anti-Talmud writers frequently remove passages from their textual and historical context. Even when they present their citations accurately, they judge the passages based on contemporary moral standards, ignoring the fact that the majority of these passages were composed close to 2,000 years ago by people living in cultures radically different from our own. They are thus able to ignore Judaism's long history of social progress and paint it instead as a primitive and parochial religion, or perhaps it's trying to stress parasitical. Those who attack the Talmud frequently cite ancient rabbinic sources without noting subsequent developments in Jewish thought and without making a good faith effort to consult with contemporary Jewish authorities who can explain the role of these sources in normative Jewish thought and practice. Even the more traditional Orthodox stream of Judaism has developed and changed over 2,000 years, and despite the unquestioned importance that the Talmud and early rabbinic literature continue to play in contemporary Jewish education, law and thought, the Jewish approach to that literature is more nuanced than the literalist readings which polemicists portray as the standard Jewish interpretations. Are the polemicists anti-Semites? This is a charged term that should not be used lightly, but the answer by and large is yes, according to the ADL, right? Anti Defamation League. Now and then a polemicist of this type may himself have been born Jewish, but the systematic distortions of the ancient texts, always in the direction of portraying Judaism negatively, their lack of interest and good faith efforts to understand contemporary Judaism from contemporary Jews, and the dismissal of any voices opposing your own, suggest that the goal in reading ancient rabbinic literature is to produce the Frankenstein version of Judaism that they invariably claim to have uncovered. Their tendentious argumentation, participation in extremist groups and espousal of extremist ideologies, when present, tend to support such suspicions. The implication of classical anti-Semitic stereotypes, nearly universal among the polemicists we describe, confirms them. In fact, many anti-Talmud polemicists have never studied the Talmud at all. The consistent manner in which the same gross errors, both in citations and analysis, are passed down through successive literary generations of anti-Talmud crusaders suggests that individual writers often merely recycle old attacks. Trying to impress their readers with their purported knowledge of the Talmud, they betray their ignorance. 2. The charges. A. Non-Jews as non-human. Probably the most far-reaching claim made by anti-Talmud polemicists is that Judaism views non-Jews as a subhuman species deserving only hatred and contempt from its Jewish superiors. As a footnote below that, here, the visceral hatred that Jews are alleged to bear for non-Jews is proven, they claim, by a variety of statements in the Talmud and by Jewish law itself, which purportedly encourages Jews to exploit their non-Jewish neighbours and engage in criminal activities against them. Many go so far as to claim that Jews are intent on subjugating non-Jews, or Gentiles, or Goyim around the world, and even on committing genocide against them. In its long history, Judaism has had its shares of bigots, racists and xenophobes, some of whom express their prejudices in religious terms. In certain historical periods there have even been Jewish sects whose worldview placed Jews higher than non-Jews in inherent value. But normative Judaism has never diminished the essential humanity and the concomitant holiness derived from the doctrine of creation in Imago Dei, shared by Jews and non-Jews alike. Based on biblical verses in Genesis 1:26-28, the principle that all men and women are created in the image of God is codified in the Mishnah, Avoth 3:14, and Talmud, Avoth 9b. And here it is in the Hebrew. Rabbi Akiva used to say, "Beloved is man, for he was created in God's image," and the fact that God made it known that man was created in his image is indicative of an even greater love. As the verse states, Genesis 9:6, "In the image of God man was created." This doctrine is echoed by one of the great rabbis of the 20th century, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, man of faith in the modern world, page 74. Even as the Jew is moved by his private Sinaitic covenant with God to embody and preserve the teachings of the Torah, he is committed to the belief that all mankind, of whatever colour or creed, is in his image and is possessed of an inherent human dignity and worthiness. Man's singularity is derived from the breath God breathed into his nostrils, probably the ha, at the moment of creation. Genesis 2:7. Thus we do share in the universal historical experience, and God's providential concern does embrace all of humanity. In the face of these Jewish doctrines expressing concern for men and women of all religions, the attempt of anti-Semites to portray normative Judaism as bigoted and hateful are revealed as thorough distortions of Jewish ethics. They claim, for example, that the Hebrew term goy, plural goyim, which refers to non-Jews, means cow or animal. In fact, however, the term means a member of a nation. See the example, Genesis 35:11, Isaiah 2:4, and has no derogatory connotation. The Bible even refers to the Jewish people as goy, Exodus 19:6, but through the millennia has become a generic term for Gentile. Of course, like terms used for any other ethnic group, the context and tone of which it is spoken or written can render it pejorative. Think of the history of the word Jew, but that should hardly prejudice someone to the appearance of the term in classical Jewish literature. A far more serious accusation than name-calling is made when anti-Semites echo the blood libel and claim that Jewish law enjoins or permits Jews to murder non-Jews whenever feasible. To support this allegation, Polemicists cite a passage in the Jerusalem Talmud, in its footnote below. There are two editions of the Talmud. One was composed by Babylonian Jews and one by Jews who lived in ancient Jerusalem. Generally, a citation from the Talmud refers to the Babylonian version, which is considered authoritative. The Jerusalem Talmud is not generally taught in even the most orthodox Jewish schools today, though advanced Talmud scholars sometimes study it. 3. See example tractate. Is that Soterum? 15:7. Maxia. Can't see that. 527. Viet Yosef YD 158.1. For more information on Phrenitis, okay, it's got a website there at the bottom. Okay, a far more serious accusation than name-calling is made when anti-Semites echo the blood libel and claim that Jewish law enjoins or permits Jews to murder non-Jews whenever feasible. To support this allegation, polemicists cite a passage in the Jerusalem Talmud stating in the name of R. Simeon B. Yochai, mid-2nd century CE, that the best of the non-Jews should be killed. But Jewish tradition has always understood this statement as referring only to a situation in which Jews are at war at such times. R. Simeon says the status of a non-Jew, a Jewish opponent, should not be taken into account, for war cannot be waged with half measures. That R. Simeon referred to wartime may be gleaned from his life story, for he lived amidst the Hadrianic persecutions of the 2nd century CE and participated in the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome. More importantly, however, every subsequent citation of R. Simeon's statement in Jewish legal literature has appended the words. It's in Hebrew, in English, in times of war. See, for example, tractate Sophorim 15:7, etc. More importantly, however, every subsequent citation of R. Simeon's statement in Jewish legal literature has appended the words in Hebrew, in times of war in English. Yet polemicists continue to cite the unqualified passage from the Jerusalem Talmud in an effort to raise suspicions that contemporary Jews are secretly commanded to murder their non-Jewish neighbours. Such propagandizing is a purposeful misrepresentation. Wasn't Ted Pike saying in the documentary the Babylonian Talmud, not the Jerusalem Talmud? Is there two different versions? B, and it goes on about child molestation. One of the more horrifying charges levelled at Judaism that it condones the sexual molestation of young girls. This charge was made in 1892 by the Russian Catholic cleric Reverend I.B. Pranitis in his Latin book Christianus in Talmudic Judaeorum. Despite Pranitis' humiliation at the Belize blood libel trial in 1913, where as an expert witness for the prosecution he demonstrated during cross-examination that he could not answer even simple questions about the Talmud. His book was translated into English in 1939, and the charge has been making the rounds in anti-Semitic circles ever since. So if he didn't know and he couldn't cite the basic Babylonian Talmud texts and what they mean, then he had no ground to stand on. Yeah, he wouldn't be taken seriously. The source for the charge that Judaism permits child molestation is a passage from Babylonian Talmud, tractate Ketubot, page 11b, and it goes on about that. From this quote, anti-Semites argue that Judaism permits that sort of thing. This, however, is not true. In fact, in several places the Talmud makes clear that Judaism possesses its own version of the American law of statutory. Yeah. A formulation of this law may be found in Babylonian Talmud, tractate Yevamot, page 33b, and it carries on about that. Kol Nidre and Jewish truthfulness. An equally baseless attack on Jewish tradition is sometimes made regarding Kol Nidre, a ritualistic formula which some polemicists allege allows those Jews who recite it to lie without moral or religious compunction. One recent anti-Semite cited Kol Nidre as proof that Judaism is more of a crime syndicate than a religion. In fact, there is a prayer called Kol Nidre that many Jews recite on the Jewish Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, though some congregations sensitive to the fact that the prayer is sometimes misconstrued have excised it from the prayer book, so it's been taken out right to leave it out. Far from any license to lie, however, Kol Nidre constitutes only a declaration in advance that any voluntary religious obligations a Jew may take upon himself, while inspired by a sermon, for example, should not be binding if it subsequently becomes clear that those additional obligations were unrealistic or unnecessary. The Code of Jewish Law, Shulchan Aruch, considered authoritative by all traditional Jews, makes clear that the Kol Nidre prayer's potency is limited to personal vows of religious obligation, YD 2:11:4, and so forth. Thus, an innocuous prayer that frees Jews from ill-conceived personal religious vows is distorted by haters into a fiendish component of some Jewish conspiracy to deceive others, or that Judaism allows Jews to lie at will. Okay. So, just saying that is a load of rubbish. Non-Jews and the study of Torah. To substantiate the depictions of Jews as conspirators, and plotters against their non-Jewish neighbours, anti-Semitic polemicists often cite a passage found in several places in the Talmudic and Midrashic literature, stating that non-Jews who study Torah are deserving of death. In their minds, the statement amounts to a secrecy pact among Jews to prevent news of their nefarious creed from reaching the rest of the world, and so forth. And it talks about David Duke, who dramatized his encounter with this Talmudic statement when he first read selections from the Talmud. And he stated one of the first passages he read really surprised him. It said, "A heathen or Gentile who pries into the Torah and other Jewish scriptures is condemned to death, for it is written, 'It is our inheritance, not theirs,'" said Hebrews 59a. if a 16-year-old boy reads something forbidden like that, he is certain to read on. The passage was completely alien to everything he had already understood about religion. Why would they not want all men to read the holy word that same way Christians want to spread the good news? Just what is in these scriptures that would oblige the Jews to kill a Gentile that reads them? Why would public knowledge of Jewish scriptures be dangerous to Jews? My Awakening, page 241. Duke apparently did not read on, however, or would have. What's going on here? Duke apparently did not read on. However, or he would have seen another Talmudic opinion in the matter. The entire passage reads, and it goes on from there. It goes on more about David Duke.